Welcome to The Line. Sexual harassment in the workplace is under extra scrutiny with the rise of the Me Too movement, and victims of sexual harassment are being encouraged to speak up despite fear of retaliation or, in some cases, disbelief. This week, Richard Ellenberg, chairman of the Democratic Party of New Mexico, announced his resignation after being criticized over his handling of sexual misconduct claims. The criticism reached a climax after Mr. Ellenberg told the Santa Fe New Mexican that a claim against John Hendry, he's a prominent union and film industry leader and union leader, didn't seem, quote, credible. Mr. Hendry, who co-owns a rental property with Mr. Ellenberg, has been ousted as president of the New Mexico Federation of Labor over the sexual harassment allegations. To talk about this topic and other news of the week, I'm joined by former State Senator Diane Snyder. Harry Van Buren, professor of UNM's Anderson School of Management, is with us. Laura Sanchez-Rivey, she's an attorney at Cuddy & McCarthy LLP. And attorney Sophie Martin, one of our regulars, is here as well. Sophie, staying with you, Mr. Ellenberg's letter of resignation said, in part, I regret the way in which I have managed complaints of survivors who have come forward about sexual harassment and take full responsibility to continue to learn and grow so that I can be an advocate and ally in the future, end quote. Pretty good quote there.
That was the best statement he made.
Yeah, you're right.
In the sequence of statements.
Unfortunately, the previous four were not good. And he really
Correct.
kind of, where do we start here on this? When I ask, there was a lot of heartburn about how he handled the situation in Doña Ana County previous to this that dogged him. Mm-hmm. And then when he came out with this quote, it was pretty easy to tell just from his wording that, questioning credibility is not going to work.
Listen, let's be clear. Mm-hmm. We've known in the workplace, and State Party is still the workplace, mm-hmm. We've known for more than 10 years, more than 20 years. This is a decades-long conversation about how sexual harassment needs to be handled in the workplace. And certainly, mm-hmm. if you hadn't gotten your act together before, say, 2017, right. I would like to think that you scrambled and got it together then. Mm-hmm. And that includes having policies and procedures in place in order to appropriately, fully, and correctly handle and evaluate questions of sexual harassment in the workplace, mm-hmm. but then also how to communicate about mm-hmm. it so that you don't create an environment, advertently or inadvertently, right. in which it becomes clear to the victims of sexual harassment or sexual assault mm-hmm. that they can't come forward.
That's right.
And when you say things like, I don't find that credible, mm-hmm. you send that message. Don't bring your complaints to me. Mm-hmm. Don't expect this organization to be able to handle them mm-hmm. in a professional way, mm-hmm. In an appropriate way. And so, I think both parts need to be working correctly within an organization or within a company. Mm-hmm. And what we saw here was that at a minimum, Ellenberg hadn't learned how he needed to address the issue in right. public. It also turns out from statements that we have heard from people who have made complaints that he didn't know how to address it in private.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And in a leadership position, Harry, that's a problem because these things are driven from the top.
Absolutely.
Culture, He is the de facto head of the whole
right.
thing. And if he's a little squirrely about this, what can we expect from everybody else? So it was important to get that right.
Well, one of the things we know about ethics and compliance in general is that it really starts at the top.
Right.
The tone at the top makes an enormous difference. Mm-hmm. And when you have somebody who gets it so incredibly wrong, you can look this stuff up. You can look up good responses and bad responses.
That's right.
But it's even what his original quote was even worse. It wasn't just that he didn't find the person credible, but he said, I have additional information that would cast this in a different light. Now, whether that's true or not is really beside the point.
That's right.
He had a very clear sort of conflict. He probably shouldn't have said anything, outsourced the response to that to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But it really does show that leadership makes an enormous difference. Mm-hmm. And when you have somebody who gets it wrong, not just in terms of how you handle these sorts of complaints, but then in terms of the response, it's a really, really bad thing for the organization.
Very much so, Laura. When you think about it, once you've got the delegation weighing in, it's pretty much over at that point. That's how big this thing got. And it just seemed to me that folks understood you cannot have somebody at the top of the food chain carrying on like this with these kind of quotes. And a swift end to it was probably best for everybody. Would you agree with that? And just kind of move on and get to the next level.
Yeah, I thought it was a really poor response all the way around by the Democratic chair. And what's interesting is, he didn't have to say anything, is what's really shocking about this. Right. He wasn't the employer. The Democratic Party wasn't the employer in the situation. The employer was the union.
That's right.
And it was an issue for that employer to address, and not something that the Democratic Party in any way needed to get involved in. So the fact that he felt compelled to weigh in on this and use his position at the Democratic Party to get obviously to get press and to be able to get headlines on this issue.
That's right.
To get his version of whatever his perception
There's time
was.
to be a Politico and fight, and there's time to
Right.
just understand.
And so it's
the
just
situation.
shocking all the way around that he did this. And
That's
I
right.
can only, I mean, as a Democrat, someone who's been active in the party, it's personally embarrassing to me to see that the head of somebody who was actually duly elected as the chairman is responding in this way. And I think he should have stepped down long before the delegation had to weigh in.
Right.
You know, why does it take elected members of the congressional delegation to weigh in before you step down? Members of your party are asking for your resignation. Representatives are, rank and file state committee members. You should really be responsive to the people who elected you and not just to the people who are, elected officials in Washington.
You know, I made reference, Diane, earlier, a situation in Doña Ana County where there was a complaint against John Vasquez at the time, he was the Doña Ana County commissioner, and how Mr. Ellenberg handled that as well. And now we have the luxury of hindsight and seeing that, how he handled that probably should have been the end of it all right there. In fact, he was asked to resign and he didn't. But you see what I mean? It was pretty clear something was not quite connecting for him on how to handle these situations.
I think the thing that was very clear to me through much of this is it's pretty clear they don't have a policy in place. And it seems like after the county commission issue that should have been immediately, and I wish their central committee had called for that or the delegation had called for it, because I think it's not just for the Democratic Party that needs a policy in place or in a communication statement. Every business needs to do this. And I think that's part of what all this discussion is bringing forward is businesses, as Sophie said, past 2017, if you don't know what you're doing and how you're going to deal with the situation, then you're not being responsible as an employer. So I think that ought to be done. The only other thing that struck me is this is an election year, and we're two months and 2 weeks maybe from the primary. And the Democratic Party, has a number of candidates, particularly in their gubernatorial race. They have some discussion going on. This is not the kind of issue they need to have detracting from their election process.
Interesting that you bring that up, because I would say, it's notable how many women are running this year.
Yes.
And so, I mean, to a certain extent, it's very difficult to say, I'm not going to vote for this woman because this Democrat didn't handle an issue involving a woman well. Do you know what I mean? So in some ways, I think that this may have structural implications or structural repercussions, but I'm not sure that it's going to affect people's attitudes towards the candidates themselves. And it is remarkable this year, not just in New Mexico, but across the country, how many female candidates are running. And many of them have said in reaction to the Me Too movement, in reaction to what they've seen in national and state politics.
Having been a candidate and a legislator, I know how important the party is at providing information and data and support. So that to me, and I happen to be a Republican, but I have many Democratic friends who are running, and I don't want them to lose the support that is so vital to running, and particularly so many of my women friends are running, and I have a little bias on that. I admit it. That I just don't want this to be a detraction to them.
Let me talk about something else. Laura, I mentioned John Hendry at the beginning. He is now out at AFL-CIO, the big labor organization, but IATSE 480, the big film union, he's still the head of. There's a meeting coming up this weekend on his fate after allegations came out from Krista Valdez, who said he sexually harassed her, intimidated her with propositions, and also had her fired from her job and then subsequent jobs after that. Not to make predictions here as we sit here, but I can't quite see how one union does not follow along with the other union, if you get what I'm saying. If one union's going to have a problem with this guy having this kind of stuff in his background, I can't see how IATSE 480 doesn't follow suit at this point. What do you think?
Well, I mean, each union is responsible for their own leadership. I mean,
Right.
in this case, he was head of at the AFL-CIO, the coalition overall of all the different unions, and in that
Right.
sense, you have multiple unions who made a determination and may have outvoted IATSE. It's hard to predict. I mean, I really can't say one way or the other, but
Right.
I mean, certainly it will be very difficult for them to be able to publicly defend keeping John Hendry there. But you know, John Hendry's been a force in politics and Democratic politics and union politics for many, many years. And you know, this is a definite fall from grace, so to speak. You know, a big thing that you don't recover from easily. If people like Charlie Rose and you know Matt Lauer and other people are losing their jobs as a result of those allegations, I can't imagine that someone at the local level is not also going to see, you know, face the same repercussions. I think the problem is that this is such a political or a very real issue for a lot of people, but it's also politically damaging for so many people. And I just don't see how IATSE is going to be able to, again, back to the distraction issue, it will be a tremendous distraction. I mean, it undermines the credibility of the person in charge to have them have this cloud hanging over them. I think the only thing that he potentially could see is if once there's been, if there is an actual trial or there's an investigation, once they get through the litigation, if it turns out that you know the allegations are not substantiated, then maybe he has some, maybe he can walk away in some way from that and rebuild later. But I think the immediate effect will be that he ends up losing that position.
I think you're probably right. Now we'll have to hold that there. When we come back to the line, we'll look at defense against a charge of institutional racism.